Hello, Nick Hodges here with today's Developer Skills Sprint. Today I'm going to talk about building an MVVM app in 20 minutes. MVVM stands for Model View Model, and that's what we'll be talking about today. This skill sprint works with just about everything that Delphi does. Any of these techniques that I'll be talking about today will work with Windows, OS X, Android, any app you want to build. I'm going to be doing it specifically in Object Pascal, but the same principles would apply to a C++ application as well. And please be sure to download the demos of either Red Studio XE or App Method 1.14. If you haven't done so, those tools will enable you to do what I do today. So here's the agenda. I'm going to talk a little bit about the slides. I'm going to do a demo, and then we'll do a Q&A at the end. And again, download the free trials at the URL down in the lower left there. All right, model view model is a design pattern that decouples your application code and separates out the concerns of your application. Specifically, it is made up of a model, which is the domain data for your application, a view model, which adapts the model to the view and presents the data to the view, and the view itself, which is actually the UI, the user interface, what the user sees. You should care about MVVM because it's the way to write maintainable and testable code. By separating your concerns, you decouple the code, making it testable and maintainable. And the compelling reason here is ease of maintenance. If you use MVVM, your app will never become a legacy application because it will have unit tests with it. It will be properly decoupled, easy to maintain, easy to update, and will never fall into that ugly pile of spaghetti that so many of us have to deal with. Okay, now it's time to go on to the demonstration. Okay, here I've got Delphi XE6 open, and I'm going to create in a very short period of time here an MVVM application. We'll start with the view. Then we'll move to the model, then we'll move to the view model, and then we'll come back and hook everything up into the view. So the first thing I want to do is create a new VCL Forms application. And onto that form, I want to place 4 controls: a string grid, an edit box, a memo, and an image. I'm going to take them, I'll rearrange them in a nice pretty way here real quick. Now the idea behind the view in an MVVM model is to keep the view as thin and unencumbered by code or business logic as possible. So basically we want in the view to have controls on a form, access to the view model, actions inside of the form that update the UI, and nothing more. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this as MVVM demo project. We'll go ahead and save unit 33 as the view because that's what it is. It's our view, the UI for our application. Next up, we'll create a new unit and we'll save that one as model because it is going to be our model. And just by the virtue of being in another unit, you can see that we're already starting to decouple our code. Now this unit is going to have a little bit of few items in its uses clause. Use the data DB, data snap, .db client, and system.sysutils, like so. And we're going to create a simple class called tModel. It's a basic class. We're going to give it 2 private fields. One called CDS BioLife. Wouldn't be a Delphi demo without using the BioLife data. And also a file name so we can hunt up the BioLife data in a CDS file. That'll be of type string. We'll have a public section where we will use a code template to create a constructor destructor. The constructor we'll call inherited create. And oops, actually I have a template that does this. What this does is it calls inherited, it it creates a client data set, it hunts up the CDS file in the same directory where the executable lies and sets the file name to be what the F file name is set to. Now, just as a side note, this might confuse people for a bit. This actually needs to go into the Win32 debug directory here, because this is where Delphi will end up putting the executable. Okay, the destructor then will simply free the BioLife client data set, and now we have our basic model. We need one more thing. We need a property called BioLife that exposes the data for the use by the ViewModel. And that simply returns the CDS BioLife client data set. Now, this is a very simple model. There's no reason that the model couldn't include data modules that expose data from a database, but for the purpose of a 20-minute demonstration, we are simply using a client data set off of the file directory. Okay, now we'll take the next step forward and we will create the ViewModel. The ViewModel's job is to present data to the view. This one's going to have some items in its uses clause as well. Data.db. It's going to use the model itself. It needs system.classes as well as vcl.graphics for some bitmap work. So this is the same basic idea. We create a tViewModel equals class, and again we're going to create a class that stands apart, knows nothing about the view at all. However, it represents the view. We're going to first give it a private field called fModel, which it will be of type tModel, so that we can access the model itself. And we want to do the CD Control J to create a constructor and destructor, complete those out. We'll call inherited create just because it's a good habit. We'll go fModel gets tModel dot create, and of course in the destructor we will free fModel. The ViewModel is a model of the view. Therefore, we have 4 items on our view, if you recall. That means we're going to want 4 properties. First property is what we'll call BioLife CDS of type T data set. These will all be read-only properties with getters attached. We're going to have a property called name of type string. Read get name. We're going to have a property called notes of type string. Read get notes. And the picture property fish picture of type T bitmap. Read get fish picture. So there's the 4 properties, and you'll notice that they're going to correspond to the 4 items on the view. I'll hit Control C, and for the BioLife CDS, the data set itself, we'll simply say that the result is equal to the model, which has a BioLife DT data set on it, and we will use that. Fish picture is a little complicated, so I've got a code template that does that for us. And this simply grabs the blob out of the blob field and inserts it into a bitmap for use in a little bit. Now, the name and notes properties are pretty simple, but they again use the model, because the ViewModel can know about the model, to call the BioLife dataset field by name, common name field, and we'll get it as a string. And we'll do basically the exact same thing for the notes. Even though the notes are a memo field, we'll just handle them all as a string all the way through for simplicity's sake. And this one's called notes, and we'll grab it as a string. Now that is a nice basic view model. It is a model of the view. The view has got 4 basic components. The view model's got 4 properties that expose data that are going to be useful to each one of those units. Each one of those components. And that is also done in a unit that's in a type and a class that's completely independent of the view itself. It has no knowledge of the view. It's eminently testable. It's completely decoupled from everything. It's loosely coupled to the model because it just uses the model. But both the model and the T-view model are testable and easily maintained. Okay, so now that we have a completed view model, let's go back to the view. First thing we need in the view is indeed a view model. Remember, the view model has everything in it that the view needs. If the view needs something, you want to put it into the T-view model first and then reference it from the view model. You want to keep the view itself as thin as possible. So we'll go to the form create event and we'll create that view model. Like so. In the form destroy event, on destroy, we'll free it. We'll always take care of our memory. Okay, now at this point we have a view model that has all the information that the view needs to display what it needs to display. And again, the goal of the view is to keep it as thin as possible, almost to the point of not needing to even test it. So let's go over to the designer. The first thing we'll do is we'll fill this grid up with some data via live bindings. We'll grab a control called a tBind source, one like so. It has a dataset property. Our dataset is on the view model, so we will say bind source 1 dot data set gets fViewModel dot BioLife CDS, and then we'll go ahead and we'll open that file up in the constructor, or the form create as it were. And then we'll go back and we'll do a little bit of live binding. I think first we'll add a navigator, so we have a navigator. Then we'll do a little bit of live binding. We will take the bind source and we will bind it to the string grid, and that creates all the live bindings necessary, so that now if we run the application, we should see live data in the grid, and we can navigate through it using the navigator. But you'll notice that these other 3 components are not yet hooked up. Well, we can take care of that soon, sure enough. The bind source DB has a data source property which has an on data change event, and in that on data change event we will set the values for those 3 properties. First, edit 1.text will get the model view models name property. The memo text property will get the notes. View model dot notes, and the image 1 picture dot graphic field will get the view models fish picture. So now when we run this, we get, ta-da, a beautiful FishFacts demo that can be navigated using the navigation bar, just like any other FishFacts demo. Just a couple things to note. Again, the view has a very little code in it, and that code is nothing more than updating the user interface with just a touch of database work in here to pull information out of the view model. The view model has all the information that the view needs but knows nothing of the view. The model provides all the data that we need for the application, and is used by the view model to present that view model to the view. Now at this point you may be asking, well, that's great for displaying data, but what if I have a button on my form? Well, let's do that. Let's drop a button on a form, and I can show you how you might manage using a button on a form via a view model. We have the button on the form, but we don't want to put code behind it that has any logic in it. We want to just utilize the view model. We can put the data or the logic that we want in the view model and have the view model do the work instead of the action of the button doing the work. So let's go back to our view model. We will put a procedure on here called, we'll call it just data button, because we're going to use it to turn on and off the data. And I'll create an event handler for it, and we'll say if biolifecds.active, then begin, else begin, end. If it's active, then biolifecds.close. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and open it. Now, there's the data button handler. We could call it press data button or whatever we want. But if we go back to the view now, and inside the button one click, we just go data button from the view model, viewModel.data button. Now we can run the application, and the data will open and close in the grid by pressing the button. And there you have a model view model application in less than 20 minutes. Okay, so here's a quick summary. You seem to be able to build an MVVM application in about 20 minutes. You've seen now how you can write a decoupled GUI application that's testable and maintainable. And this is the reason you want to do this is that you've decoupled your code. It's maintainable and testable, as I said, and this is code that will not become a big pile of spaghetti. This code, if you continue to maintain it as decoupled as it is, will be maintainable and updatable for years to come. Here's some MVVM resources. The code for today can be found at bit.ly/MVVM demo. That's on Bitbucket. That's my code for the demo for the code today. There's a great code grade tutorial by Malcolm Groves at the YouTube address there. And Malcolm's also got some blog posts that show you more about MVVM as well. The next up for code sprints will be JSON, the new ini file by Jeff Lefevre. I hope you said your name right there, Jeff Lefevre. It's about JSON and the new easy way to store data as text, and that's in 2 days on August 21st. So that's it for me, and now it's time for Q&A.
All right, great. Thanks, Nick. That was a great session. I learned a lot about MVVM. Got some questions here for you. Why you're not covering free and nil?
Oh, yeah, I don't use free and nil because it's the spawn of Satan and evil, and its use is tantamount to, oh, I don't know, spitting on the street. Something horrible like that.
Why is that?
I will refer you to my blog on that subject. If you go search Google Nick Hodges free and nil, you will find 2 very large articles explaining exactly why that is.
All right, so I'm going to move on to other questions here because Bruce has got some more troll bait for you. It is for binding a source possible which is not a T data set, i.e. a T object list of T my object for multi-line views like a string grid.
Yes, there is. There are calls inside the library that allow you to hook up T enumerable items from your code into the bindings, and I refer you to Malcolm Groves' demo example, menial tasks, which does exactly that.
Menial tasks.
Yeah, I'm looking up the code here, and I'm going to try and find the calls that do what is being asked about. Let me see if I can find them real quick. Must be in the view model. I'm sorry to slow things down, but I can't find them. But they are in the menial task demo, so I'll give that a look.
How would you approach MVVM without access to the standard UI components and much of the data binding?
The types of components that you have and the components that you use don't matter as long as they have properties for displaying data. You don't need to use data binding at all. You can use the technique that I use to show the edit box and the image and the memo field.
Mm-hmm.
So the UI components you don't need the standard UI components. You can use any set of UI components from a third party as long as they have receptor properties that can be set to show data. And you can use those components as well.
Do you have a link to download the sample code?
I do. It is on display right now. bit.ly/MVVM demo. It's on the screen right now.
Oh, yep, there it is.
On Bitbucket.
http bit.ly/MVVM demo. How the model was not created starting from a data module? So I'm guessing why didn't use a data module?
Just for ease of use and saving time, I only had 20 minutes. There's certainly no reason that you couldn't use a data module as part of the model. As a matter of fact, I would suspect that for a more complex application, more complex than the one I demoed today, you would indeed do that, and that's perfectly acceptable to have a data module be part of the model portion of the application.
Another kind of view, like web, using the same model view model. How would you do that?
A web application?
Yeah.
You do it exactly the same way, except for the front end would be a web page instead of a form, a VCL form. Certainly, model view model, and model view presenter or model view controller are very, very similar patterns and development patterns, and you can use MVC is a very common pattern to be used in the world of web. One of the things I could have done too would be to very easily put a FireMonkey front end on the view model instead of a VCL application.
Sure.
For instance.
That's really the advantage of the MVVM, is that you can change out that view to different platforms or whatever, whether it be web or make a REST interface for it or whatever you wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If you wanted to update other fields based on button activity, wouldn't that quickly start to add complexity to your view? Let's say updating fields, which is not part of the database, but on another info file.
What I recommend is anytime you can put something in the view model, put it in the view model and keep it out of the view. So if you could have a property on your view model that controls the display of something on the view, you can put that in the view model and then have the view model update the value there.
So if you have some other data source, it would be in the view model. So if you have multiple models, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I didn't mention this, but a good rule of thumb to follow is that every form in your application should have its own view model. One view model per form, and one form per view model.
Okay. One form per view model.
One view model per form. So every time you create a form, create a view model for it.
But then you could have multiple models attached to a single form and a single view model.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
So a single view model could have multiple models behind it though, right?
Correct, or yeah, absolutely, you can have any number of models. The models stand alone and be used anywhere across any of the view models.
Okay. I would love to see a skill sprint on the testability of MVVM in automated unit tests. We are still struggling with getting our developers to do automated unit tests. I believe there is some misunderstanding on our developers' part on the best way to do this.
Agreed. I'm always up for anything having to do with testability. I did a month or so, well, a couple months ago, I did a RAD in action on unit testing, so I'd recommend you give that a look.
That's right. That's a good one, resource as well. How do you compare the model view controller approach, like from Smalltalk, for instance, to MVVM?
They're very similar in notion. The the notion of a controller versus a view model is slightly and subtly different, but they're very similar. Certainly, MVVM inherits much, MVVM's heritage is based on MVC from the Smalltalk days.
Okay, so MVVM, all right. There's a couple questions about differences, so when would you prefer one or the other, or is it just a matter of preference?
Whatever works for you.
Okay.
MVVM kind of just clicked in my head, and I understood it right away, and so that's kind of the way I go. There's nothing to say you couldn't do an MVC or an MVP application in Delphi. The differences would be, as I said, subtle and small, but the pattern is basically the same.
In the binding source component, can I use the data from a JSON file?
I don't see why you couldn't. You'd have to get that JSON data into a data set, which certainly is doable. I believe that there's components that do that, or certainly code that enables that. And then once you have it in a data set, you can use the binding source component to look at and follow that data set that comes from JSON.
Can it be used on a SQL Server database?
Absolutely. There's no reason you couldn't use, as I said, a data module with SQL Server components that expose themselves as data sets to the view model.
Can I put the data from a TFD JSON dataset class into a binding source component?
I don't see why you couldn't. I believe that you can, yes.
When I want the view...
Oh, sorry, Jim. I just wanted to interject there. Yes, you can. You just use the REST response dataset adapter, and you can get the JSON from the FD JSON dataset and then point that wherever you want. But yeah, you can get at it. It's a dataset.
Okay. When I want to use the view to update data on the model, I think the view must set some properties on the view model, and then the view model write this data to the model. Is this right? How can this be done as simple as possible using data binding or other RAD Studio components?
First answer is that's correct, and the answer to the second part there is how can this be done is that believe that once you hook up using data bindings, once you hook up a view model to the view using data bindings, that is a two-way relationship, and the view model values will be set if they are changed on the view via via live bindings.
Okay. It seems this concept is very productive when combined with UML modeling. Do you recommend it?
Sure, there's no reason why you couldn't model this out first using a UML modeling tool and then turn that into code.
Would you put input validation and custom formatting for the string grid in the view or the view model?
That would be up to you. I would argue that if you can put it in the view model, do put it in the view model. But data validation or custom formatting is presentation type stuff, so it probably could go in the view as well. The view should be limited to talking to the view model and doing things that the user can see. So that's what the view should do. So if the view is doing more than that, then it probably is something that ought to be pushed back into the view model. That's a general rule. Again, I don't want to say these are ironclad rules. That's a general rule.
I found that a lot of these guides, if you use them as a motivation to think about what you're doing and think about why they make recommendations they recommend, that's really the most important thing, whether or not you're strictly adhering to them or not.
Yeah, these aren't strict rules to follow. They're just general guidelines. I should have been maybe a little more clear about that. There's no one way to do MVVM. It's a set of ways to think about application development. It's a means of separating the concerns of that application, and exactly how you do it is up to you, as long as you're thinking about in terms of things like separating concerns, creating testable classes, things like that.
So Brent says he's heard about this before but has never used it. Would this be a situation where you want to use it to make your interface different for different platforms? So for example, maybe a different platform on iPhone or iPad or Windows or Mac, and then all have the same backing code?
Yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing you'd want to do with this. One of the things you want to do, of course, is to keep the view so thin that it's easy to change views out. If I'd have had another 10 minutes, I would have shown how you could very easily build a FireMonkey front end to the Fishfax application using the view model and the view without changing them at all.
So I was thinking about your comment about your code turning into spaghetti. And I know I've worked on lots of big projects where you start with one grid and you get everything working. Later on, you have to change grids for some reason. And that's when things all go to pot because you got all this code, all integrated in there in your one form file. And
Yeah,
it's handling the grid display, it's handling getting the data, and then when you change it all out, it's just a mess.
yeah, and the grid, doing it that way makes the code very rigid, very fragile, and you're very heavily coupled to the grid, and you want to make a nice thin layer over that grid as opposed to a very thick connection inside of the form itself.
Okay, MVVM looks like 3 units instead of 1. What has been left for the view.pass? Are any buttons or actions there?
Well, yeah, one of the things that you'll do with MVVM is you will end up with probably more code and certainly more files to manage, but that's not a bad thing. It's decomposed, so that's good. It's decoupled, that's good. The view, of course, is going to have anything on it that you need to build your UI, and of course, so that will be buttons. If you want to use actions, that's certainly highly recommended to use action list. But again, I want to stress that if there's anything that can be put into the view model unit, you should put it into the view model unit. There's no hard and fast rule about how all that should work, but the view as a general rule, again, should have nothing but code to manage the GUI itself and code that talks to the view model.
So if you have an action, or if you're using actions, the event handler for the action would probably call code in the view model then to do whatever they're going to do? Is that how it works?
Yes, that's exactly what you'd want to do. You'd want to couple those actions only to the view model to as large a degree as possible, unless the action is going to, say, manipulate something in the GUI itself, and then you reset checkboxes or you draw something or whatever it is the GUI is doing. Those are okay, and that's something that's okay to put into the view as well. I
Sorry.
was just going to say what you want to avoid is putting business rules in your view. You want to avoid that as much as possible at all costs.
Okay. Is there C++ code examples in your download?
I'm sorry, I don't know C++, so the answer is no. My apologies.
It's pretty straightforward. It's just the UI. I mean, it's just creating a class and exposing it, so it should be easy enough to convert, I hope. What level of XE6 is required to do MVVM?
Any version at all. You don't need any particular version or SKU or anything like that. These are all very basic principles that work with any version.
Is MVVM in your new book?
It is not discussed in my current book, but I may be writing a new book that would have a chapter on MVVM, yes.
So it's going to be a future book. It's not going to be a new download chapter later for your current book?
I don't think so.
Okay. What's the difference between MVC and MVVM?
Very, very little. Generally speaking, MVVM was originally designed by the Silverlight and WPF team, and it was designed with data bindings in mind. And since ASP.NET, where MVC is most famous, doesn't have data bindings per se like they do in I got to get my acronyms correct here. WPF and Silverlight. The basic difference is MVVM uses the data bindings and what we call live bindings in Delphi and in Rad Studio, I should say. And so the answer is they're very, very similar in nature. The notion is the same, but MVVM was just invented and coined with the notion of live bindings in mind.
Thanks for the data button demo. So any data should be fed to the view through the ViewModel, and any action view might have should be wrapped via ViewModel methods. Is that correct?
That's the general rule, yes. I don't want to say it's hard and fast, or that's exactly how you do it. That's the general idea, yeah.
Carl says he's just about to start a small project that this would be ideally suited for, so thanks for the well-timed information.
That's great. That if you have a small project to start on, that's great, and then eventually, hopefully, you'll just use it everywhere.
Here's a question. Do you have general rules to follow this when working with legacy code?
First thing I would say is any new forms that you are adding to a legacy application, you can do using MVVM. You can create a model, you can create a view model for that form, and in fact, one of the things that I didn't emphasize enough is that every form should have its own view model. You don't have to have a model for every form, but every form should have a view model, and every view model should have a form. So my guess, I guess for legacy applications, I would just say to make sure anything new starting up, any new form you create for the application, use MVVM for that, and then you could slowly migrate away by migrate your forms to be using view models and models as you go along.
How about unit tests? How to make best use of unit tests with this demo? How would you do that?
Well, then you'd write, I didn't do it again because of the strictures of the time, but you would write unit tests for your model. You'd write unit tests for your view model, and then one would hope that you wouldn't even feel the need to write any kind of tests for the view because it was so thin. Testing GUIs is notoriously difficult. You can use tools like Test Complete and things like that to drive the GUI. But the real rules and the real guts of the system will be in your view model and your model, which are eminently unit testable and integration testable. And so you can do that quite easily as you go along, and if you're using test-driven development, you would write the tests before you even write your model in your view model.
Okay, excellent. So now you said that each view should have a view, or let's see, what was it you said?
Each view should have a view model, and there should only be, you should only create a view model if you have a view.
Okay, so each form is attached to a view, which is attached to a view model. There's a one-to-one relationship all the way across.
Yes.
Okay, and then
The form is the view.
The form is the view.
Yeah.
And then the model, though, you could have multiple models or one model, or how does that?
Multiple classes in your model that relate to specific business entities, business objects, and then the model can be used anywhere you need to use it. But the thing about the model is it stands alone and it doesn't know anything about the view model or the view. It's just a standalone class that presents data and information for use by the view model or even the model if you want. Or I'm sorry, even the view if you want. But generally speaking, the model will be used by a view model.
So Ian asks, do you have a preferred naming convention for all of your files? This is Malcolm's presentation. I've adopted project source view, viewform, myform.pass, changing that to viewmodel, myvm.pass. Anyway, it's in the Q&A log, which you should be able to see, Nick, as well.
Yeah. I don't have any particular pattern that I've used. I kept it really simple for myself in the demo, just naming them each file for what it was. Malcolm's way is a really good way. Certainly you would want to take advantage of namespacing, or at least the dotted file names, to keep things in order and keep things straight, and then a directory structure that can do the same thing as well. I think Malcolm's way of doing things is as good as any.
And then Lyndon was saying, but I guess he's got a line of code here, BioLife active equals not BioLife active.
Yeah, he's probably right. I should have done that.
Okay. Yeah, Jim's there. Okay.
I'm here, sorry.
We're down to do you separate the persistence logic, e.g. client data set or FDMEM table, away from the model in a real app, ?
Yeah, you probably could. You would do it in a data module, and then the data module simply would become part of your model.
And will this work in other versions or other editions of Delphi?
Yeah, this will work in Delphi 1. You know, the idea is just you create the classes and use them to present data to the view model, have the view model present the information it needs to the view. That transcends any version of Delphi.
Yeah, the live binding part came in XE2.
Yeah, that's true.
The binding part, live bindings then came in a little bit later, but bindings, bind expressions.
That's correct. The binding part is is version dependent. You're right. Thanks, David.
And you said that bindings was the difference between MVVM and MVC. Was that right?
Yeah, the MVVM was first coined by the Silverlight and WPF teams, and they use data bindings very heavily. And the difference probably between MVVM and MVC and ASP.NET is the bindings. And since Delphi has bindings, it makes sense to use the MVVM model as opposed to the MVC model. The difference is subtle and...
Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.